Under a blood-red sky, crows hovered, cawing ominously over a lifeless battlefield. Amidst broken swords and rubble, a warrior lay on his back, alone in the devastation. The warrior slowly regained consciousness, the harsh signs of battle, bruises and blood visible on his face, wondering to himself if he had fainted. With great effort, he managed to lift his torso and sit up, surveying the destruction around him and his massive sword lying nearby. Two questions occupied his mind. How long had he been unconscious, and what had happened to the battle? Suddenly, while lost in thought, a sharp, excruciating pain shot through his chest, causing him to bend forward, clutching the source of the pain, concluding that some of his ribs were broken. Despite his severe injury, he gathered what remained of his resolve, realizing he could still move. He began to look around for his comrades, but what he saw filled his heart with sorrow as he found the bodies of his team members strewn everywhere. One of his comrades, the mage in the orange robe, had been fighting bravely using his glowing talismans to fend off two dark enemies before a violent explosion flashed. The scene then shifted to the main adversary, the Demon King, a giant armored figure carrying a deadly purple sword on his shoulder under the shadow of an eternal black eclipse. The blonde-haired hero faced him with all courage. The Demon King had revealed his true power. The authority of the Demon King. A fog appeared beginning to gather around and under the hero's feet, from which a massive army of the undead emerged. The warrior was surprised by the appearance of such a large number of undead, concluding that this was a power the Demon King had hidden until that moment. He shouted, calling to his team members for help. Priest. The priest turned towards the source of the sound, the warrior Rogue. Rogue asked the priest to cast the authority spell on him and charged at full speed towards the Demon King. The priest cast the authority spell on Rogue, chanting, "You who have realized the authority, lend us your power." In response to that call, he activated his ability, Authority of Light, Painful Oblivion on Rogue, which resulted in a massive explosion of white light that overwhelmed the darkness. Rogue charged with all his might, shattering all the undead who stood in his way, but the army of the undead was endless, rushing towards him relentlessly, leaving him no chance to catch his breath or steady his feet. Rogue swung his sword violently, the blows raining down like a storm, cutting the undead to pieces, declaring that he would take care of all the enemies to clear the path for his comrade. Rogue screamed at the top of his lungs, a cry that shook the battlefield, encouraging the hero to advance and face the Demon King without hesitation. The hero advanced steadily towards the Demon King, his eyes filled with determination, his sword gleaming with power, ready for the confrontation with all his courage, his energy clashing with the king's purple energy in a final decisive duel. The sounds of collision between the hero's sword and the Demon King's power echoed, each blow shaking the ground. But despite the fierce battle, both stood firm with no clear victor. The violent fight between them caused the complete destruction of their surroundings. The conflict between the hero and the Demon King intensifies. In a decisive moment, the hero delivers a crushing blow with his sword. The hero's sword penetrates the Demon King's body, severing his arm. The hero declared before the Demon King that it was over. The hero stared at the Demon King with a sharp gaze, pointing his sword at him, asserting that his end was inevitable. The Demon King's arm was healing at an insane speed. In a moment of carelessness, he extended his powerful hand and grabbed the hero with lightning speed. The Demon King spoke with an ominous calm, asserting that there is no end but merely a continuation. His body began to glow with unstable energy, and the hero realized his opponent was planning to self-destruct. Before the explosion could engulf everything, Rogue suddenly appeared. Looking at the hero who seemed frozen in place, wondering why he had stopped, Rogue severed the Demon King's hand that held the hero with all his might. While he remained to face death, declaring that if they must die, they would die together. The hero screamed the thief's name in despair as a massive explosion consumed both the thief and the Demon King. In the aftermath of the explosion, only silence remained before a towering, mysterious black pillar, known as the Abyss Transition, erupted from the ground. The priest looked at the pillar in confusion, wondering what it was. Meanwhile, the hero, who survived thanks to his comrade's sacrifice, saw Rogue's specter and thought he had safely escaped the explosion. But the hero froze in shock when he saw Rogue with a massive hole in his body from the explosion. At that moment, another monster appeared on the battlefield, looking at the fading remains of the Demon King. It expressed its disappointment, having expected to witness its master's ascension to the throne of power, but what happened seemed nothing but a futile death. Suddenly, Rogue, despite his injury, rose and charged, kicking the monster directly in the face with great force. The monster noticed that Rogue had somehow survived the explosion. Its astonishment grew as it realized the truth. Rogue's survival meant he too possessed the qualification to ascend the throne of authority. He threw Rogue to the ground. Rogue shouted to the hero, alerting him that this was the right moment to attack. The hero and the priest responded immediately, summoning the authority of light in the form of his holy sword, Ascalon. With one decisive blow, he brought the sword down on the monster, shattering it completely. After the dust settled, the mage appeared, asking with concern if both the hero and Rogue were safe. The hero calls for the priest to come to him, and the priest expresses his relief that they are safe. When he arrives, he notices Rogue's body next to the hero, whose wounds have begun to regenerate and heal on their own, much to his surprise. From a distance, the Demon King's follower watches the scene, thinking to himself that although he was momentarily confused, things are proceeding as they should. He then asks the priest if the hero received the blessing all right. The hero turns towards the Demon King, who is still alive despite everything. The Demon King reassures the hero not to worry, explaining that his physical body has served its purpose and is beginning to collapse, and that victory was ultimately theirs. In his final message, he tells him that his story has ended here, and now it is the hero's turn to begin his story. The Demon King predicts that the hero will be forced to make countless choices and will sink into a deeper despair than ever before, and that even if he falls and is crushed by the responsibility placed upon him, he must pray, never stop, and keep moving forward. His last wish was for the hero's journey to have a different ending than his own, which he described as empty and foolish, with his last trace vanishing and the sky left clear. The battle that determined the fate of the world ended. After that, the days passed quickly. The mage was captured by the headmaster of the magic school and returned to it. The fairy also embarked on a journey back to her homeland. As for the priest, he gave his final farewells and left the mortal world once again. The hero was crowned king amidst the celebration of his people, and Rogue also returned to his original place. Thus, the false light faded. Life began to stir again under the sun's rays, and fear left people's daily lives, beginning an era of peace that lasted for a long time. Approximately 150 years later, a person with a skull-like head sits leaning against a tree, declaring that he too is continuing on his path. It becomes clear that this person is Rogue, a former member of the hero's party, now over 150 years old, wondering if he has caught a cold. He contemplates the immense changes that have occurred in the world around him, where mountains that seemed unmovable have crumbled and flat plains have turned into barren deserts. Rogue continued his contemplation under the starlight, thinking that the only thing that hadn't changed after all these years were the stars and himself. But he quickly corrected himself, realizing that even he had changed. He looked at his wrinkled hand as he thought about the curse of immortality that had befallen him. What was supposed to be a blessing granted to him by the Demon King before his death was, in reality, an eternal curse that would never disappear. He questioned the purpose of this immortality, the meaning of his existence if he couldn't even disappear, and his fate to remain alone forever. While lost in his existential thoughts, a falling star caught his attention. A small child passed in front of him who, upon seeing him, screamed in astonishment, pointing out that he was a skeleton. After 150 years since the battle with the Demon King, the time that had stopped for Rogue began to flow again on a mountain behind the village of Chongtap on the outskirts of the empire. The little girl looked at Rogue with curiosity. Rogue wondered why she was in this place so late at night. Suddenly, the girl grabbed Rogue's face, shocking him. As she exclaimed in wonder at him being a talking skeleton, Rogue asked her to stop, telling her he had seen many children get lost in the mountains, but she was the first to pat him like this. He then asked her disapprovingly if she hadn't learned to run away upon seeing something inhuman. The girl replied innocently that she was taught not to judge others by their appearance. Rogue grumbled to himself that he was feeling nostalgic and emotional for the first time in a long while, only to be interrupted by this strange girl's appearance. The girl eagerly asked about Rogue's identity, and noticing his strange sword, she asked if he was a knight. Rogue denied being a master and began to boast that he was an imperial messenger who travels across the country carrying the emperor's messages, and that he was currently protecting this mountain with a cursed sword. This impressed the girl, who concluded that an imperial messenger must be very strong, which Rogue proudly agreed with. Continuing his boasting, Rogue explained that this was not a job anyone could do, but required knowledge of high-level magic like summoning spirits. To prove his point, he summoned a small purple ghostly creature from his sword. The girl's fascination grew, and she exclaimed excitedly that Rogue must be really strong. Then, with shining eyes, she asked Rogue to accept her as his disciple, because she wanted to become strong. Rogue laughed, thinking to himself that he had been getting bored with his repetitive daily routine, but he refused the girl's request, saying it was a bother. The girl was surprised by the refusal and asked him if the story wasn't supposed to go with him accepting her as his disciple. The little girl did not accept Rogue's refusal and began to plead with him insistently, calling him stingy and a heartless skeleton. Rogue ignored the rest of her words and replied sharply, confirming once again that he was not a master. The next morning, as Rogue was relaxing under the tree, he was surprised to find the girl still there, shouting enthusiastically and practicing with a stick as a sword. He asked if she was going home, but she stubbornly declared that she would not leave until he taught her swordsmanship. Rogue urged her to go home, expressing his concern that her parents would worry and complained that because of his skeletal appearance, he was often mistaken for a monster who kidnaps children. The girl told him not to worry about that, then revealed sadly that their house had burned down and her parents had died in the accident. She added that her mother had told her before she died that she must become strong to survive on her own, which is why she was so insistent on learning to fight. She then looked at him seriously and asked if he understood her situation now. Rogue sighed slowly, and after a moment of silence, he finally agreed to teach her swordsmanship. The girl was overjoyed and asked him to confirm he meant what he said. Rogue replied affirmatively, adding in a calm tone that he couldn't keep refusing a child's request, which confused the girl for a moment. The girl quickly dismissed it and thanked him enthusiastically. Afterward, Rogue looked up at the sky as if addressing the late emperor, saying that his people had gone through a great ordeal, and for that reason he would teach this child how to be self-reliant. Considering it an atonement for his failure to deliver the emperor's message, from that day on, her long training journey began. Days and years passed as they trained together, sharing moments of rest under the tree. Rogue would summon monsters from his sword, and the girl would begin training to fight them. They would even sometimes scare travelers as a form of play, and a strong, unique bond grew between them. They came to depend on each other's presence. The girl gradually improved in her use of the sword. During her training with Rogue, the girl would exchange blows with him fiercely. Despite this, they were both happy with the time they spent together. After 11 years had passed, Rogue, who had caught a rabbit, called out, "Girl, come and eat." A young woman with long blonde hair replied, "Yes, master." After 11 years, the little girl had grown into an attractive young woman. She sat beside Rogue to tell him she had something serious to discuss. Rogue asked her what was so important that it changed the mood so suddenly. She sadly informed him that the village she used to live in had been abandoned by its people due to a sudden increase in monsters, and that the empire had deserted it, causing everyone to lose hope. Then she declared that she had become strong enough. Rogue immediately realized she was planning to become a hero and told her that after 11 years of training her, he could read her thoughts. He remembered his old friend, the hero, who had the same dream of helping people, and how despite the ridicule of those around him telling him he was unworthy, or that it was impossible, he would always reply that one doesn't need qualifications to save people. At that moment, Rogue decided to support her in her endeavor. As the sole heir and master of the northern hunting techniques, he gave her a dagger as a gift, maintaining their traditions. He wished that she would always use this sword with good intentions and asked her to go save the world and then return to him, assuring her that he would always be waiting for her in the same place. After she left, Rogue was alone again, wondering how long her journey would take, expecting it might last 5 or 10 years. He just had to protect this place until then. Believing that she would succeed in her mission and return, Rogue decided he just had to wait patiently for her return. This brief connection in his long life had changed him, unlike in the past. Waiting was no longer a frightening thing for him. After a long time while he was sitting alone, he was surprised by her return. Bearing the scars of a fierce battle, she greeted him, and he barely recognized her after all this time. The young woman began to enthusiastically recount her amazing adventures and how the empire was much larger than she had imagined, full of new places and things. But she also faced many monsters and used what she had learned from him to help people. Thanks to her actions, people started calling her the heroine, but this angered the emperor, who saw her as a thorn in his side and an obstacle to establishing his imperial authority, so he ordered her assassination. As she spoke, she started to feel dizzy and swayed, falling into his arms. In her final moments, she held him tightly and asked if he was okay and if he had cried in her absence. In Rogue's arms, the heroine spoke her final words, expressing her wish to hear his story before she breathed her last. Rogue's eyes filled with anger and hatred towards all who had harmed her. Meanwhile, a troop of imperial knights arrived at the mountain. One of the soldiers grumbled that the cursed heroine did not die peacefully, but came to this mountain to die. The commander ordered the soldier to be silent and continue the search. The knight commander discovered someone in the forest and ordered him to descend the mountain immediately and pack his things. It turned out this person was Rogue, who asked in surprise why he should leave the mountain, adding that this place was no longer a mountain. Rogue revealed his true power and summoned monsters, transforming the area into a horrific scene filled with the remains of monsters that attacked the knights. Rogue told them that 120 years ago, when he roamed the continent as a messenger, he found the remnants of the Demon King's army in this place. He crushed their heads and dismembered their bodies, which accumulated to form the soil of this land, and this forest grew upon it. Since then, he had been guarding this place, fearing that necromancers might misuse it, but it seemed there was no need for that now. Amidst the knight's astonishment, the commander ordered everyone to calm down and take their positions, explaining that a single necromancer's ability to control the undead is limited regardless of the number of available corpses, but he stopped talking abruptly when he saw the size of the army Rogue had summoned. The commander realized there was no hope of facing such a massive number of monsters, a huge army of the undead advancing towards them. The commander asked in terror who Rogue was. Rogue gave the commander no chance and beheaded him before he could resist. With pride and anger, Rogue declared his true identity. He was not just a skeleton, but the mouth of the emperor and the voice of the empire. His voice echoed throughout the empire, delivering a message to its people. People everywhere wondered what was happening. Then Rogue recited the founding emperor's will. If the empire deviates from the will of its founder, I grant the nobles and loyal subjects the right to restore it to its correct path. He then addressed his old homeland, declaring it was time for them to pay for their crimes. In a nearby village, the survivors of the monster attack saw the army of the undead approaching. They raised cries of warning, and the remaining soldiers rushed to fight the monsters with all their might. And the commander ordered the remaining units to assemble to repel the imminent attack amidst the blazing battlefield. The knights realized that what they were facing was not the work of an ordinary necromancer, but a full-fledged army of the undead. Faced with this imminent danger, Asura ordered everyone to clear a path for him, preparing to unleash his first combat technique, known as Wolf Hunt. Asura launched his attack, wondering about the identity of the opponent capable of summoning an entire army. Ishur Soma was one of the Imperial Knights. A giant monster moving between the buildings in the village caught his attention. When he looked closer, he saw that the necromancer was being carried by the giant monster's hand, moving at the forefront of the undead army, which surprised him as a mage like him was supposed to be protected behind his army of the undead instead of standing on the front lines. He prepared to strike with his wolf hunt technique again, and he cut off the giant monster's leg that was carrying Rogue, and he ambushed Rogue with a spear thrust that targeted his leg from an impossible angle. When he saw the attack that hit his leg, he concluded that Asura was the one who had cut off the girl's leg. He charged at Asura at full speed, seeing only one goal before him, to eliminate him. Asura managed to block Rogue's attack with great difficulty. Asura skillfully deflected Rogue's sword as he swung his own. Asura exposed Rogue's body with a swift move, leaving him vulnerable to a direct combat attack. Asura swung his sword at Rogue's head, but the latter deftly dodged the blow with ease. Rogue quickly rushed forward and kicked Asura's leg with force, causing the latter to lose his balance. He then delivered a powerful punch to his face, knocking him to the ground. After that, Rogue pounced on Asura, sitting on top of him, and began to rain down a continuous barrage of punches. But Asura desperately tried to get up from that position, struggling to escape Rogue's violent grip. Asura gathered what was left of his strength and kicked Rogue away with force, then swung his sword in the air to push him further away and give himself some space to catch his breath. He called his opponent a damned beast, admitting that it was the first time he had been pushed this far since his encounter with the four knights, then asked in confusion about his true identity. The answer came from Rogue, the Avenger. Ishur decided to himself that he needed to buy more time and perhaps provoke his opponent further. He scoffed at the idea of revenge, sarcastically asking who he was seeking vengeance for. He then boasted that he had killed so many that it was impossible for him to know which victim this avenger had come for. Knew that necromancy consumed a huge amount of energy, so he decided to stall to buy time until his opponent was exhausted. But his plan was shattered when the avenger suddenly appeared beside him, placing a hand on his face. Ishur tried to resist, but Rogue quickly stabbed his hand with his sword, paralyzing him and making him unable to hold his weapon. Rogue condemned Asur's boasting of killing, explaining that the people of the Empire and even his disciple, the heroine, had suffered because of this petty pursuit of power. Ignoring the pain in his hand, Asur tried to attack Rogue with desperate resolve to cut him down. But Rogue kicked him hard, sending him flying away, and Asur was thrown into the rubble. From among the wreckage, he justified his actions as being for the cause of the Empire and that the deaths of those people were necessary. Rogue replied that he was a pathetic person and that if his actions were necessary, then his death at his hands today was also necessary. But Asur answered confidently that he would not die that day. Suddenly, the sky split open as pillars of blue light ascended from the ground. This was the moment Asur had been waiting for. As the anti-undead barrier shield had been prepared, using 155 human mana batteries, he declared his mission complete and ordered its activation. A massive wave of holy energy was unleashed, completely annihilating the army of the undead. The knights rejoiced at the disappearance of the monsters before them. Asur told Rogue of his victory, and that his army had been destroyed, explaining that this barrier was created by the mage of the heroes party 120 ago, and was described as the greatest in history. But Rogue calmly replied that he knew that as he remembered well the stubborn craftsman spirit that mage possessed. Asur was surprised by what he saw as Rogue declared that the army didn't matter to him as he could summon another one. He explained that those who would stand with him this time were the victims of the Empire itself, the exploited citizens, who would join him in his quest for revenge, and he promised to bring an end to the Empire. His memories took him back to the past and his old party where they hated war but had to fight to protect what was precious to them. Those were days when death seemed inevitable, and he thought those days were gone forever. As Rogue delved deep into his memories, he found himself bitterly wondering if all those lives lost and sacrifices made were for a future like this. He found no satisfying answer. For all he knew was that he had once gone to the battlefield, but he no longer remembered the motive that drove him or for whom he was fighting. In this time without them, he felt a deep sense of loss, wondering where he was supposed to go now. 4 days after the heroine's extermination, Rogue found himself in the Northern Adventurers Village on the northern continent. He entered the Adventurers Guild, the only place open at that time, and spread out an old map asking for help in finding his way, explaining that he had lost his way while heading north along the mountains. One of the people there rudely replied that this was an Adventurers Guild, not a local information office. But Rogue calmly asserted that he would leave as soon as he got what he wanted. The adventurer noticed that Rogue, who claimed to be lost, smelled strongly of blood. He added that he remembered an ominous rumor that had recently spread about a necromancer who killed knights and destroyed the village of Chongtap behind the mountains. Without warning, the adventurer lunged at Rogue in a swift attack, then asked Rogue directly if that rumor was about him. Revealing his skeletal face and shouting that he was a living dead, Rogue warned his attackers to choose their opponents wisely. Then he unleashed his power in a violent explosion, striking the ground with force and calling them children. With that decisive blow, Rogue was able to eliminate the assassin who was hiding underground, waiting for the right moment to pounce on him. The adventurer's leader admitted the failure of their ambush and ordered his men to kill him. Rogue received the order coldly, reminding them that he had done nothing but ask for help in finding his way, then clenched his fist, declaring that everything that happened from now on would be their fault alone. A huge man charged at him with a raised sword, shouting at him to die, but Rogue easily blocked the attack, then delivered a series of blows to him. He then delivered a final blow that knocked him to the ground. Another person charged at him, delivering a series of blows with his spear, but Rogue easily dodged his attacks. Rogue blocked the spear with his hand, which surprised his opponent. Rogue grabbed his opponent and threw him to the ground with force, then looked around to find 2 other people approaching him. The assassins tried to surround Rogue from the front and back so that he could not block either of them. Rogue skillfully dodged their joint attack. The 2 attackers were surprised by the failure of their attack, which they had thought would succeed easily. Rogue grabbed their heads together and slammed them hard on the ground. In an instant, he disappeared in the blink of an eye from before them, suddenly reappearing behind the adventurer's leader, who wondered in shock how he could have disappeared. The leader tried to get as far away from Rogue as possible, then began to exchange attacks with Rogue. Rogue realized that his opponent's feint to the right was just a trick and that the double attack was the real one, yet he managed to dodge it. After that, Rogue kicked the adventurer hard, sending him flying into the wall. The onlookers were amazed at how quickly the fight ended. With one devastating blow, Rogue knocked the leader to the ground, striking fear into the hearts of the remaining adventurers, who could not believe their leader had been defeated so quickly. As Rogue was about to finish off the rest, a blonde man suddenly appeared and stopped the fight, declaring that he could give Rogue what he wanted. The adventurers recognized the man and called him Guildmaster. The man introduced himself as Thor Finland, the master of the Northern Adventurers Guild, Garm, and suggested they move to another place to talk in the Guildmaster's office. Thor began by mentioning the story of the skeleton that the adventurers in the mountain behind Chongtap village were talking about. He explained that they had sent several reconnaissance teams to investigate, but they had returned empty-handed, which made them think it was just a rumor. Expressing his surprise that it was true, Rogue interrupted him sharply, stating that he had no time to waste and asked him to state his request directly. Then Thor explained that his request was simple. He explained that this guild, despite belonging to the Empire, had suffered from long neglect. The villagers had abandoned their homes in search of safety, and those who remained had died in reckless missions to defend their town, while the rest lived in constant fear of monster attacks. The Guildmaster told Rogue that they were just slowly waiting for death. Rogue berated the Guildmaster, asking if he was trying to complain about their misfortune, and told him that if they didn't want to die, they should have resisted the Empire. He added that if one does nothing, nothing will change. Thor replied that it wasn't that they did nothing, but that they couldn't do anything. He explained that the responsibility for law and order in the lands abandoned by the Empire fell on those who remained. The adventurers who shared the same will gathered to protect their homes, and the other guilds poured everything they had into protecting their families and homes, which left them in a situation no different from their current one. Rogue asked if they had ever considered forming an alliance between the guilds to fight the Empire. Thor replied that Rogue was putting it simply, but that would mean declaring war, and it wasn't just about courage. He added that countless people would die. Thor admitted that they had been waiting for someone to save them. He continued, saying that they had desperately held on in anticipation of hope, and then the heroine appeared. Her warm hope lifted them out of despair, and they believed she might be able to save them all. But he added sadly that they had clung to a false hope and wondered where they had gone wrong, and whether it was all just foolishness and a weak attachment. Then Thor looked at Rogue with determination, explaining that meeting him today had made him realize what they were lacking, which was hatred. His perspective had changed. He no longer cared if tomorrow didn't come or if their homes were destroyed. If they could kill their enemies, then death was a price worth paying, for that was the reality of war. Then Thor made a request to Rogue, pledging to immediately assign 2 adventurers to accompany him, and that they would later gather everything they had to support him. He begged him, whether he was an Avenger or a demon, not to care about his identity and to allow them all to join his war. Rogue apologized, saying that he didn't mean to destroy his guild, and admitted that the fault was also his for letting the Empire neglect these lands until the village's situation reached this state. Rogue agreed to the request, noting that 150 years had passed since he last accepted a request, then placed a red adventurer's card on the table. Thor was stunned, wondering if this was a Ruby-class adventurer's card from the Great War era, which was the highest rank but had long since disappeared. Thor asked about Rogue's true identity, but Rogue told him not to worry about it, describing himself as just a ghost from a dirty past. He then announced his acceptance of the request, explaining that his first destination was the Northern Mountain Range, the greatest and most dangerous mountain range on the continent where the snow never stops falling. Rogue began to take the road from Chingtap village to the adventurer's post in the north. 5 days after leaving the village, Rogue and his 2 adventurer companions were moving cautiously along the mountain range. Rogue commented that they were moving at a very fast pace for a secret march. One of the adventurers watching the horizon with his binoculars replied that they couldn't risk running into the Empire's army. Rogue confirmed that they were indeed moving quickly. Muir and Sammy saw another group of people on the horizon, and Rogue wondered who they were and how they had managed to get ahead of them. One of them guessed that they were probably not a search party chasing them, then realized they were survivors from the village of Chongtap, and it seemed they had joined others who were looting villages on their way back to the capital. His companion, Sword Harriet, concluded that their path had been cut off while trying to move along the mountain range, which was confirmed by their lack of winter clothing. Rogue turned to his 2 companions and asked the guide about their destination if they took the lower path. Muransamy corrected him, introducing himself and his companion, Sword Harriet, asking Rogue to at least remember their names. He then answered his question, explaining that there were small scattered houses along the road, and Sword Harriet predicted that the group would raid them in search of food and supplies. Sword Harriet commented bitterly that looting houses had become common for the Empire's knights, and that the provinces had gotten used to it since the current emperor ascended the throne. After a moment of thought, Rogue calmly announced that he must eliminate them. Before his companions could comprehend what he had said, he leaped from the top of the cliff, leaving them in a state of shock and disbelief. Down below, chaos erupted among the soldiers who shouted warnings of a possible ambush. Rogue landed in their midst, confirming their fears. Sword Harriet rushed forward, shouting and wondering if he was that desperate to die. From above, Sammy watched the scene and told his companion that the man was already dead. The alarm sounded among the soldiers as they recognized the attacker, calling him the necromancer of Chongtap village. Rogue began to move among the knights, taking them down one by one while the cries of others for mercy rose up. The commander ordered his men to stop retreating and to surround the attacker. He tried to urge them to attack together since the enemy was just one person, but his words were cut short by a blast of Rogue's purple energy that killed him. Rogue mocked the dead commander, asking if he really thought he was alone and if his eyes were just for decoration. Then Rogue unleashed his true power, summoning a terrifying army of purple specters and spirits. Sword Harriet watched the scene from a distance, realizing that the power Rogue had shown at the Adventurers Guild was only a small fraction of his full strength. The ghostly army descended upon the soldiers and tore through their ranks. Sammy recognized those spirits in terror, describing them as the ghosts of Chongtap village. As the battle neared its end, Sammy suggested they go down. Sword Harriet agreed, noting that the battle was decided and would soon be over. In the final scene, a lone knight charged in a desperate attack towards Rogue, letting out a final cry. Rogue parried the final knight's attack, easily dodging his spear, then kicked him hard in the head before he fell to the ground. Rogue saw a golden necklace around the knight's neck, whose helmet had partially shattered as he fell dead. The necklace brought Rogue back in time to when the adventurer had given him that necklace as a token of apology, admitting they couldn't help but be suspicious of someone with his appearance. The man explained that the necklace was a good luck charm for adventurers made by his daughter. Rogue accepted the gift and asked him to thank his daughter, but the man sadly told him that the Imperial Army had killed her 2 years ago. Rogue immediately apologized, but the man reassured him not to, explaining that everyone in the village carried similar wounds and cursed the Empire, and that they were nothing more than human butchers burning what's left of their lives for the sake of revenge. He then offered him a piece of advice, asking him not to ruin his life by seeking revenge as they had. He added that everyone in this world has someone waiting for them, and he was sure the same applied to Rogue, begging him not to go too far down that path. The memory faded, and Rogue stood before the knight who had been stabbed in the back by one of Rogue's monsters with a spear, and whose last words were an apology to his daughter, Michelle. Rogue clenched his fist tightly, struck the ghost with force, and it immediately dissipated. His companions approached him, and Sammy praised him, telling him he had done well. He offered for them to take care of cleaning up the place and collecting the bodies he would need to create more undead while he rested, but Rogue surprised them by ordering all the bodies to be burned. His companions expressed their surprise, commenting that he was a peculiar necromancer, and Sword Harriet noticed the deep expression of sadness on his face. As Rogue watched the burning flames, the voice of the Demon King echoed in his mind, asking him mockingly, "See? What did I tell you? It's your turn, isn't it?" The voice continued its warning that Rogue would be forced to make countless choices, would sink into a despair he had never known, and that the real despair had not yet begun. Rogue shouted in anger, ordering the voice to be silent and to stay in the underworld as long as it was dead. The specter of the Demon King laughed loudly, asking how Rogue thought he would survive in his current state. It then told him to struggle as he wished and try to defy fate, but at the end of his path awaited a despair that not even the Demon King himself knew and dared him to try to escape his destiny. Elsewhere, Fry, one of the war knights, was enjoying the sight of a burning kingdom, expressing her admiration for the sound of people's screams and the smell of the fire. One of her soldiers informed her that the men wanted to play football with the princess's head, but she refused, justifying it by saying her heart was broken. She had thought this kingdom was large enough to offer an enjoyable fight, but the battle ended quickly and boringly. She wondered with boredom if there was anyone in the Empire crazy enough to start a fight. At that moment, a messenger from the Empire arrived, announcing the appearance of a huge army of the undead at the northern wall and issuing the Emperor's order to subdue the evil necromancer leading that army. Fry laughed happily, amazed at the quick appearance of such a madman. She then stood up and ordered her troops to assemble, declaring it was time to go to war. Meanwhile, Sword Harriet and Sammy were talking as they marched with a silent Rogue. Mur and Sammy commented that Rogue had been walking like a corpse for 2 weeks without saying a word, adding that there was something strange about it, wondering how a head could float in the air like that. Sword Harriet recalled the guild leader's words that this undead from Chongtap village was likely related to the recently deceased heroine. He pointed out that Chongtap village was also where the heroine had spent her childhood, and that the timing of her escape from the knights to the village coincided with the undead army incident. Most importantly, Rogue's fighting style was an exact replica of the heroine's. The guild leader concluded that Rogue was probably not a bad person, but just someone desperate and struggling just like them. Although he didn't know why he was heading to the northern mountain range, he was sure that Rogue was not their enemy. At the same time, there was no guarantee that he was their ally, but he was certainly the key to overthrowing the empire. Thor Finland, the guildmaster, had told the adventurers that he would entrust them with the task of guiding Rogue since they were from the north. Sword Harriet wondered if someone as unpredictable as Rogue would act according to their will, but Thor reassured them, expressing confidence in his good intuition. On their way, Sword Harriet pointed in the direction of Chongtap village. Rogue agreed to stop there, which brought back memories of the past when his disciple would put a paper bag over his head, and the happy moments they spent together in the village. When Rogue entered the familiar tavern, the owner greeted him. She told him he was too late if he had come in search of old memories, as the tavern had been closed for a long time. Then she asked him if he still used that bread bag, revealing that she knew him. Rogue was surprised that she was able to recognize him. The tavern owner explained that she knew he was the teacher of the girl who had worked for her and that she had heard many stories about him, but she didn't know he was a talking living dead. After that, she poured him a glass of a cheap wine called Diani and explained that its name meant a new beginning. She revealed to him that his disciple had entrusted her with this drink before she left, hoping to drink it with him one day to celebrate their journey. She added that sharing this wine had become a custom among adventurers as a wish for a safe journey, but she sadly mentioned that this wine hadn't been sold for a long time as there were no more adventurers in the village. She then confronted Rogue, saying that she understood his motives for rebelling in a ruined country, but she believed the path of revenge he was on was wrong. She questioned whether the image he had become, even if he succeeded in saving the people of the empire in the end, was really what his disciple would have wanted for him. She affirmed that she didn't think so and that the girl would have wanted something brighter for him. She then told him that his disciple had left other things with her to pass on to him. She explained that the girl's dream was to live a fairy tale, gather companions, save people, and defeat evil. She had wanted to embark on an adventure like the tales of the legendary Ruby-class adventurers, and she wanted to experience it with him. The word adventure echoed in Rogue's mind, and he realized how hatred can blind people and make even the wise lose their way. He wondered if his anger was causing him to repeat the same mistakes again. He admitted to himself that although everyone called him a teacher, he had, in fact, only learned from his disciple. With renewed determination, Rogue decided to carry their hearts and dreams on his shoulders. He thanked the tavern owner for the drink and turned to leave. As he was leaving, it seemed as if her spirit was asking him where he was heading now. Rogue remembered the meaning of the wine, a new beginning. He declared that since he had drunk it, it was time to set out again. This time, his journey would not be for revenge, but to experience what his disciple had always wished for, an adventure. And so the tale of the skeletal messenger began.
Alright, that's the end of the story. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.